Okay, we are moving on to our expert today. That is Ms. Kokunre-Eghafona, Professor of Cultural Anthropology, Gender Development at the University of Benin in Nigeria. She is acting as Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences there. She has a master's in history, a master's in anthropology, and postgraduate museum studies, a PhD in archaeology. Her special interest is people and cultures of Africa, indigenous knowledge systems. So most welcome, Ms. Kokunre-Eghafona. Can we hear you? She will
yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
The floor is
yours. I hope you can see my slides. Yes. All right. I would have loved to be present there physically, but circumstances beyond my control. But all the same, it's a pleasure to be here and at the International Safeguarding Conference 2026 with the theme, One Commitment, Many Contexts, Safeguarding Across Cultures. And my topic is on the importance of culture for human lives, for respect, dignity, safeguarding in the church and beyond. Without wasting time, I want to thank the Cardinal, His Eminence the Cardinal, who gave us a definition of culture, and it makes my work easier. Because usually culture is often used loosely. People just say it and without any meaningful, deep meaning of culture. But then, like we have learned earlier on, culture means a lot. Our identity, our well-being, and sustainable societal development, culture involves all this. I would love to say in the year 2000, two Harvard professors wrote a book called Culture Matters, and they talked about how culture shapes a lot of things from civil war, financial institutions, even divorce rate. So culture matters a lot, and culture separates us, distinguishes us as human beings, shaping our identity, relationship, shared citizenship, experience across societies. Basically, it's culture that makes us different from other species, because we have culture and we have speech, and as such, we are able to pass on culture from one generation to another. The very first definition of culture was by Edward B. Taylor in 1871. And let me define it. He described it as that complex whole, which includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, law, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. And from then on, other definitions stemmed up. In summary, we can say culture is the way of life of a people. And you know, it serves as a fundamental social and emotional foundation for our human existence. It's culture that provides us with stability and that sense of security that we have within a family unit. Then it also shapes our individual and collective self-perception and valuation of others. As has been mentioned before, it also encompasses society, social structure, language. Like I think Father Zolen mentioned that, religion, belief, arts, literature, education, customs, and tradition. So when we say culture is a way of life, it encompasses a lot of things that make us human. Basically, it's good for us. I know many of us, most of us, we know the characteristics of culture. But then, it's good for us to have a look once more. Culture is not biologically endowed. We acquire it through learning, Also, too, we share among other members of the society, and also to culture exhibits integration among its various components. I would also like to stress that culture is dynamic and subject to change, especially in some societies where they still insist on some anachronistic cultures and insisting that this is our way of life. Culture is not a static precipitate of history, but it is dynamic and subject to change through many ways. Innovation, when it doesn't serve its purpose anymore, contact with other groups of people. To move on, culture also demonstrates adaptability in response to our environmental and social changes. Then culture is both material and non-material elements, the visible things we see as the cultural attributes of people, as well as the non-material. For example, our language, our thought patterns, and so many other things. Moving on, culture provides, talking about understanding cultural influences on safeguarding practices. Culture provides that unseen framework for our everyday human behavior, shaping our values and everyday social practices. And also too, these cultural elements, they influence how we perceive harm, protection, and responsibility. In talking about responsibility, I would like to mention a particular case study. For years, I have been working on human trafficking. We had serious issues of human trafficking where I come from. And the young ladies, even underage girls, found their way to Europe engaging in prostitution, having been trafficked. And when we finally, those who were deported, and when we had to finally conduct research, many of them were left as a result of being responsible for their family in a situation of a home that is polygynous in nature, the man having several wives, and then the law of primogeniture is very strong where I come from. When a man dies, his eldest son inherits the house he lived in. And in cases of polygynous marriages, you see the other wives and their children are homeless, they'll be looking for shelter. And as such, many of these young ladies felt responsible. They knew what they were going to do in Europe. Some of them were walking on the streets in Rome, in Italy. And you know, it was seen as a sense of responsibility because of the cultural background. They felt they would have to work by any means, earn money to provide shelter for their families. Moving on, safeguarding meanings, they differ across societies due to our cultural beliefs and structures. Thus, culture shapes how safeguarding is understood, applied, and experienced. I would like to talk about cultural competence safeguarding once more, talking about cultural relativism. And when we talk about cultural relativism, we have to understand cultures based actually on that particular system. We have to judge them according to their own standard, not according to our own standard, or else we have that tendency of deciding that a particular culture is backward or it's not civilized. But then this is what, like when we discuss the characteristics of culture, this is how they adapt to their society. And you know, when we talk about cultural relativism, in other words, we judge cultures based on their particular way of life. So cultural context is essential for designing and implementing effective safeguarding practices. And you know, safeguarding, it requires for us to understand individual backgrounds, their religions and community norms. So culturally competent safeguarding, it demands for us to have balanced, person-centered approaches We should avoid stereotyping. Like I gave the example in cultural relativism, you have to judge people based on the culture that is suitable for them, that has been developed, the culture of their own particular ethnic group. So, and to address barriers, we should also recognize cultural norms, but assess cases individually without normalizing harmful behaviors. Like we'll discuss later, we cannot say harmful behaviors, oh, it's the way of life. While we are recognizing cultural norms, I think I had one of the discussions earlier talked about cultural respect and how we immediate victim intervention. And I'm sure by the time we'll weigh it out, whether culture will prevail over for us applying immediate safeguarding principles. Moving on, talking again about cultural competence safeguarding. Cultural competence safeguarding, it addresses diverse abuse definitions. And you know, the thing about talking about abuse, it also depends on the culture. What you may regard as abuse in one culture may be discipline in another one. For example, in some of our ethnic groups, we don't spare the rod, spanking the children, making sure. So, but whereas in some other cultures, it's seen as abuse. So, cultural competence safeguarding, we have to address diverse abuse definitions, reporting barriers, sensitive support, and institutional authority context. Also, it addresses bias, language barriers, and ensures person-centered communication using trained interpreters. I would love to stress about using trained interpreters rather than using people who belong to, who maybe family relations from the same culture. Somehow, while they are dialoguing, they can also have influence on the victim, and the victim may not be able to express themselves well. So it's better to use trained interpreters. I would also like to relate this to Jeffrey Sachs' differential diagnosis, when he talked about the different economy of different countries, that we shouldn't just imagine what is okay for a particular country should be used to solve an economic problem in another country. He likened it to the doctor-patient relationship. You don't just see a patient and, you know, all the patients before you say, oh, this is what is happening, and apply the same medicine. No. And in looking at this, I'm comparing it to cultural application in safeguarding. Both approaches emphasize the context of context over one size fits all. I think Father Zolen has been talking about one size fits all when he gave his remark. So although they operate in different scales, Jeffrey Sachs was talking about the economy of a nation, but then we will also realize that when we are dealing with issues, one size fits all doesn't work. So safeguarding principles always supersede cultural practices. When we are talking about harmful practices, for example, I gave the example of young girls who feel they must be responsible for their family and travel, being victims of human trafficking, being involved in sex trafficking to get more, because that's all they can do to get money and to help their family back home. So safeguarding principles must always supersede cultural practices, especially those that cause significant harm. Female genital mutilation, forced marriages, we cannot excuse or minimize them, saying, oh, this is just basically culture. And you know, moving on, we are talking about the church as a healing sanctuary with cultural competence safeguarding. The church functions as a sanctuary, offering healing, protection, and spiritual support for communities. Back home here in Nigeria, we, you know, the church matters a lot to people. This is where they find refuge and healing. When the priest or the pastor, the reverend proclaims something, people take it to heart. So the church functions truly as a healing sanctuary for so many people. So cultural competence safeguarding ensures safety, while we are also respecting diverse beliefs, values, and background, even in the church background. The church too, also in addressing abuse, should also challenge context, where theological concepts, when they are misapplied to justify control, suppress dissent, or compel forgiveness. And we should also mention that pastoral care for victims and survivors, they should be empathetic, non-coercive, and prioritize the healing process over institutional protection. I would like to cite the work of Beer and Zonel that talks about effective safeguarding requires strategies tailored to specific cultural context, as we have mentioned earlier. So effective prevention depends on, we have to understand the different cultural perception of authority, child development, and vulnerability. Therefore, a rigid, uniform approach is insufficient. Even if we have a textbook we go by that talks on safeguarding, we must also know that we should consider the cultural aspect. And safeguarding measures must be adapted to local context to protect children and vulnerable adults effectively. So in conclusion, I have to still stress that culture matters a lot in safeguarding, and that safeguarding practices, we should consider backgrounds to ensure respectful, effective, and the care delivery. Professionals, professionals, we must avoid generalization in so many ways. We usually generalize, hoping that one size fits all. When a case comes up, we already know the solution. But at this time, we should also consider the cultural background. We should avoid stereotyping, prioritizing listening to lived experiences over assumptions. And my final conclusion to us practitioners, we should always respect identity, language, belief, but culture must never justify abuse or neglect. So thank you very much, as I stress again that culture matters a great deal. Thank you for listening. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Eghafona, for presenting us some fundamentals on culture and also how culture influences our understanding and practice of safeguarding. And it's wonderful that we can see you now really face to face, at least on the video. Okay, we still have some time now for some questions and interaction with Professor Eghafona. So maybe take a few minutes just to reflect on what you have heard, and then is the opportunity to come forth with a question or comment, but please be short and precise, and when you speak, also say your name, where you are from, and your role. Okay, I see here a hand up. Okay. We need the mic. Yes, but Professor Eghafona cannot hear you when you don't speak into the mic.
Thank you very much. My name is Federica Manfredi. I'm a medical anthropologist based in Italy. Thank you very much, Professor, for your lecture. I have a big question. Sometimes culture tends to be generalized. So how can we avoid to overgeneralize a behavior, just simply connect it as culturally based? So how can we trace the line in between what is connected with culture and what is maybe connected with selfish intentions or individual intentions? Thank you very much.
Okay. Do I answer or take other questions?
Are there further questions? Here we see.
Any other questions?
Yes, here are two more questions. First,
Okay.
here. Okay.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Professor. So, by the way, I'm Nij. I'm a lawyer from the Philippines. And my question is culture in relation to human trafficking, Professor.
Yes.
Will we be right in saying that culture decides who is vulnerable in a sector, or who is vulnerable in a particular, who is vulnerable for purposes of human trafficking, or those who are bait for human traffickers?
Okay.
Okay, we take a
If I
third,
get you,
a third
you just
question.
want to find out. Yes.
We
Okay.
take one
Yes,
third
all right.
question and then the word is yours.
Yes. Do you hear me? Yes. So I was deeply impressed by your sentence that principles, safeguarding principles can supersede culture. But then when we talk about practices, we cannot accept practice that cause harm with the justification of culture. So it seems that from what you said, that you put a red line in what produce and causes harm. But I have a very naive question about that. There is not a risk that also what is perceived as harmful can be culturally influenced, that in some cultures something can be understood as harmful, which is not in another one?
Okay, Professor, the word is yours.
Thank you very much. All right. Thank you very much. First of all, I think the first question talked about generalizing culture when it comes about safeguarding. You know, when an incident occurs, you will know whether it has this cultural base. Whether, for example, somebody comes from a different culture from yours and is involved in an issue that has to do with safeguarding. The most important thing is that safeguarding overrides any form of culture that will cause harm. I know we throw the word culture around the whole place. If we do not want to generalize culture, we'll take that case particular on its own, judge it by its own merits. Like when we talk about cultural relativism, you judge by its own merit. I would like once more to stress cultural relativism. When we talk about cultural relativism, I would like to stress it here that, you know, a society's customs. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you are very clear.
Oh my God.
You are very clear.
Yeah, a society's customs and beliefs should be understood within the framework of its own culture. But then, my internet is a little bit unstable. It's a little bit unstable. So, there are guidelines. There are guidelines that will guide you to know this is where there is harm, and this is where we can permit part of the culture. And I mean, why we actually need culture for safeguarding, to know the background where the victim is coming from, to know the angle where the victim is coming from. For example, some victims will find it difficult to talk about abuse and harm done to them about their parents. So as a practitioner, we have to overcome, we have to find a way to get the victim to overcome that fear. And I hope I have explained that aspect of generalizing culture, because we have to take each case specifically according to its merit. And talking about the culture of human trafficking, you know, like I mentioned earlier, for a long time, the people I was dealing with concerning human trafficking, they didn't see human trafficking as harm. Even the word for trafficking a victim to Europe was literally translated as a sponsor who wants to do good. So I think the question was the traffickers themselves. At a point, traffickers themselves were seen as people who were going to assist some other these victims out of poverty. And you know, while I had to do the research on human trafficking, like I mentioned earlier, I had to look at the culture of the people. It was from there I saw the root cause. That root cause that you are obedient unto death to your parents, who will ask you, are you going to allow the family to starve? And these young girls are willing to obey their parents and go outside the country to be involved in anything. Just at the same way too, the traffickers themselves saw themselves as saviors until, you know, harm is harm. Until we were able to point to both the victims, the parents, and the traffickers that this was harm against humanity. That human trafficking was evil. It was not promoting any form of, culture. It wasn't promoting any form of culture. And when we started dealing with the issues to solve the problem of human trafficking, we had to ask the people, what are your needs? We had to find out the needs of the people to meet them in other legitimate ways rather than these ways of irregular migration. And the last question, if I can remember, I think it had to do with, if you can remind me, it had to do with harm. Whether, please, can I, the very last question, I found that I didn't jot it out. Please, can I have it again? Something about harm being culturally.
It was a provocation because you said that the red line from what you said can be seen in the practices that cannot be accepted practices that provoke harm, and this yes. Exceed cultural differences. But there are nuanced situations where, or the question is, are there situations where what is conceived as harm is in turn influenced by the culture?
Yes,
because I've been asked this question in several contexts and it's difficult to answer.
Yes, a lot of things that are harmful are considered as, oh, this is part of the culture. But like I wanted to stress, when we talked about culture is not static, it's dynamic. And then when we talk about universal human rights, these things, they will have to override the culture of harm. So in talking about that, like in my conclusion, I still mention that we still have to consider that no matter what, no culture should justify abuse, harm, or neglect. And we know it within us as practitioners of safeguarding. We know when there is harm, and as such, I guess we are excused from not relying on the cultural background or say, oh, this is the culture, you have to get a girl circumcised. But then, fortunately, this now has been agreed on in international sphere that is harmful, and most people have agreed that female circumcision should no longer be done. Now it is, I can tell you, it is still done subtly, quietly, because the people now know that the world frowns against it. So many harm we will consider harm in the society, and we say, oh, it's part of the culture. For example, underage marriages. People who do it, they can do it quietly because they know the world now frowns at it. Now the world is a global village, and we know a lot of things that are considered, oh, this is part of our culture. We now see them as harmful. So I hope I was able to answer your question in that aspect. Oh, my internet is unstable again. Hello, can you hear me? My internet is on. Can you hear me?
We can
my
hear you.
My internet is unstable. Yeah, my internet is unstable. So
Okay.
I hope I've been able to answer those questions to your satisfaction.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Eghafona. Thank you very much, and for your commitment, and we wish you God's blessing.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and all the best in Nigeria, especially also for your mission in safeguarding. Okay.